Easy E, how are you?
Shawnee, do you know that feeling I was talking about when you try to run long distance again and you feel it is the intro, just fat. just, just I just felt so heavy. Do you know that feeling?
I don't know. I tried running back after marathon, and my Garmin's calling me strained right now. So like I'm out. It's all you on this one. My Garmin's like, here, just you're useless. I know that feeling. We just feel sluggish.
I
I'd
just
say
feel
sluggish.
Yeah, I just feel like it's no, obviously everything in the summer was 5K, 6K walk, 5K, 6K walk. So I took on my first long run. Are you ready, marathon runners? 11K. Woo! It's the start of, for me, 18 weeks to Barcelona, our
Right.
Barcelona marathon trip. But I just had that. I talked about this on the last episode about that feeling of don't let your fitness go. Don't, keep it there. And my God, was I plodding. Now, look, I am enjoying it. It's 32 degrees. It's 29 at night, and it's just lovely. It's 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 a it's night and day between
Remind
what
new listeners,
was.
where are you?
I'm in Doha,
Okay.
so I'm in my little box room here, flying three flights a day, and then I get released to go running at nighttime. It's not as fun as it might seem on Instagram, but it's so yeah, it's I just felt so heavy. Then I thought, is it my food? Is it this? Is it that? And then I was like, no, Eric, it's still 29 degrees. That has an effect, all that, but it's a process, and I just have to trust it. I just have to just switch
Mm.
off my brain for the next 4 weeks and just get that base fitness back. And but yeah, it's good. I did like a week of running and went into work today, and people were like, "Have you lost weight?" I was like, "No, I just trimmed my beard." But fuck you. Yeah, don't put that
I,
on me.
Are you at that stage? And like it, like for people doing the Barcelona Marathon, like a lot of things I'm seeing like in Instagram is those two key sessions, like maybe a long run, maybe some sort of hard run in the week, or because it's 18 weeks out, are you just like just get out and get miles and legs and build it up, and then maybe when we get to like 12 to 14 weeks, you'll worry more about getting the harder session in with the longer session, or what way is what way are you starting your training now for Barcelona like that?
So for me, I've let Jesus take the wheel on this one, and
The
and uh,
amount of running coaches we've had and like just the detail of the program, and you
and
went,
by
Jesus,
Jesus,
just
I
do
mean I
it.
mean Brandon, who was on our podcast.
Oh, I'm with you now.
In Brandon, we trust. Brandon is going to be our coach for all those who have signed up for the Barcelona Marathon. We have Brandon as our group coach. But we and the podcast have always said if we don't do it ourselves, there's no point shoving it down people's throats or in their ears or whatever it is. So for the first time ever, I've gotten a coach for this marathon.
Right.
And more so because of all the comings and goings and changing from here to home and this and that. I'm just like, I just need to click my watch and go, what am I doing now? How long do I need? I need an hour and a half. Okay, go. And whatever it spits out, just get it done. So not so blindly. Obviously, I'm the night before I know, so I can plan my time, I can plan my
Yeah.
food and all that. But for this one, like the group, I'm going through the exact same process. I have gotten on board with the coach. I've gone with the more personalize me, please, Brandon, because I haven't got the resources. It's interesting. It's interesting to have, and I've taken the advice of the podcast, I suppose, if that makes sense. We've had so many
Right.
coaches say, get a coach, and let someone
Yeah,
else do the
absolutely.
thinking for you. And it's, to be honest, in this phase, if I was on my own like a normie, I was pure ignorance for 4 weeks and then I get fit again and then it becomes fun. With this, I felt heavy. I feel this. I'm feeding it back to someone. And then I'm noticing I was supposed to have an interval session. And then I did a long run. I said, look, after 6K, I really did not want to be there, yada, yada, yada. But I know I just need to stick it out. I had a crap sleep, like 6 hours or something. Then I noticed my workout had changed the next day to a cycle and a swim. And he was like, you didn't sleep well. You felt sluggish yesterday. Let's take the strain off. So he put me on the bike and told me to go for a swim. I was like, oh, now, wow. So I just put
Okay.
a pigged out the plan. So yeah, it's really good to have someone in your corner,
Hmm.
someone's monitoring. And do you know what's weird? Like me and you always said, and a lot of people on the podcast, when we started this out, we and you had a little bit of marathon plans out there. We were coaching, we were doing little bits of everything, and just trying to bring people along with us. And everyone said, I've missed today and I've missed this run. Should I do this on? And I suppose having that person in your corner to go, no, I've altered it. So we're still going to reach our targets. You don't feel as guilty. You don't feel as bad. It's teamwork because the coach is flexible, life is flexible. My life definitely has to be. And it's just a case of this is happening. This is what I foresee this week. How are we looking? And he was like, right, need to get this one done. This is it. And it's absolutely really good. I have to say, we're taking our own advice. I swallowed the pill we've had given to us and front row seats to for so long. And I have to say, it is refreshing, especially because I am so isolated. There's no running groups here. There's no, I'm not with an athletics club. I'm sure I can find them, but I can never really take part. And it's just difficult in Doha. Maybe back in Dubai I can get a bit more, but it's just different. And it's nice to have someone else looking out for me, I suppose.
Do you feel the accountability as well? Because he's gone through all that for the programming and keeping an eye on all the rest. And then he's like, right, instead of a run, you're doing a cycle and a swim today. And you're like, oh man, he's after going through all effort. Like, I better do this swim and cycle. Or just like, does it just feel like, actually, I can manage that? Does that ever come into your head to do this? Or
Yeah, no, it did. I was sitting on the couch and I was thinking about getting 2 cans of Diet Coke and watching the football, but I knew there was something scheduled for me, and I was like, well, there's no problem watching the football. You need to get running now, and you need to put in a good session, and you need to stretch while you're watching the football. And if you want a Coke, have a Coke, but make sure I get my water, make sure and I had my chicken and my potatoes I made myself. And I did enjoy, but I enjoyed that accountability element of it. And like this isn't new, but I suppose the transition for me is transitioning away from just doing it out of guilt. It's more someone had done it, yes. So there is that accountability factor, but I wanted to do it because I want to see how far I can go. I want to see improvement and I want to trust in a process that someone is kind of deciding for me, which a lot of people have talked about on the show and have seen improvements. And I'm like, I'm just letting someone else drive. If I just keep showing up, let's hope something good comes out of the other end.
and you gotta look good doing it as well. And these Any Given Monday t-shirts, they're proving a pretty good hit.
Yeah. So it is now, if you're listening to this, too fucking late to sign up for a t-shirt. I have done a lot of admin. Someone said to me there during last week when we first did it, was like, oh, you're gonna have a lot of paperwork to do. And yes, it is a lot of admin the way we did it. We didn't expect, genuinely did not expect the response that we got for the t-shirts.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing. I don't think it's fair to go through the list of people, but those who reached out, those who wished us well, those who just wanted to buy one to support us, and those who were excited to wear one. We are very surprised, very grateful, and very humbled. It was really nice to see all the requests and get all the nice messages. So it is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic and helps this podcast keep going along with the sponsors. And it's absolutely brilliant. I'm absolutely amazed that people wanted to buy our t-shirt. It's really strange. It's a bizarre feeling.
It really is. I'm completely blown away on it. It's really cool. But in this intro so far, we've talked about marathons. We've talked about, the training and getting out there and all the rest. But we actually haven't talked too much. And we haven't talked too much. We talked about marathons in the past about the psychology side of things. And that's where this week's episode of the podcast comes in.
Yeah, this one's very good. And it's a perspective, I suppose. It's very common to us all, but probably just framed really nicely in this episode. Those thoughts we've always had or perspectives we've always had. And it's just to hear someone just say it so not to say it in a bad way, but so easily and so calmly and just be like, oh yeah, I get it now. And talking about these things and just an all round good person who's enjoying running and talking about running and helping people along the way. And it's just, yeah, it's a great episode. And again, introducing the other side of it, that mental side.
Absolutely. And with this said, it's this week's episode of the Any Given Monday podcast. Let's go. So this week on the Any Given Day podcast, we have an online marathon coach who combines psychology and endurance with a BSc in psychology and a master's in clinical psychology. Rachel Conway, welcome to this week's episode of the Any Given Day podcast. How are you getting on?
I am good. Very excited to be here. So thank you for having me. How are you guys?
You're getting on much better than Sean because on the first take it was like alphabet soup with Sean trying to do your intro. My God, Sean, thank God we've a psychologist because I think you need a few tests. I think this podcast is going to go
BSc,
very,
MSc,
very,
MBA,
very different
MBA. It
directions.
was too many letters for me there,
It was
Rachel. It was
that
too many
bad,
letters.
that
Too
bad. You
many.
wouldn't even let us go live. It's going to be on the Christmas special that one. I'm going to remember this one. I'm going to remember this one.
That's the first
Rachel,
time I've had to stop in an intro.
you are so welcome. I'm so sorry for how average my colleague is, but you are not. You are amazing. We've looked through your Instagram and you are talking about a lot of things that people like. And one thing people like to do is know your story. Where did this start for you? And obviously there's psychology and the running, but how did the two of them form and where did the running start?
Yeah, okay. Well, brevity is not my strong suit, so give me the eyes if I'm going on for too long. So I suppose sport and exercise in general has always been a really big thing in my family. I have a few uncles who are professional athletes. My brother was a professional athlete, retired recently. So I grew up a lot around sport. So I suppose sport was always big in my house. Was never really that into running, but I suppose when the summer sports came around every year, I was always quite good at the running, but it was always that short distance. Like I did 100 meters, did relays, always went to like East Leinsters and Leinsters, but it was never really taken that seriously. I don't know if it's that because I was like in a girls' school and like the girls didn't really care that much about going running. It was more about just getting out and doing something. So that was the first part of it. And I wouldn't say I loved it. I would say I liked running, but I never really had the growth to like take it any further. So when my parents were like, do you want to like join a running club? I was like, I actually don't know if I do. And I would love to like hatch a story about why that is. I was just kind of like, yeah, I like doing it when I do it in school and it gets me out of the classroom a bit and it gets me into the sunshine in the summer months, but I had no growth to take it any further. Then throughout college, then I didn't do much other than kind of like just a bit here and there. Like when I was in the gym, you hop on the treadmill for like 20 minutes at the start or the end of your workout or do something a bit lazy. And then COVID. So I suppose that's a lot of people's story, right? I I actually took up running because I was like, if I don't take up running, either I'm going to kill my parents or they're going to kill me. So we need to have time that we're all away from each other throughout those COVID months. So honestly, lads, I hadn't really like done kilometers, didn't really know how fast I was, didn't know how long I'd be able to run for. And I kind of just built it up slowly. I just remember everyone was doing that like 5K with the hand, that real cringe 5K, and everyone was pretending that they were like Usain Bolt and could run.
Like me and Sean.
Exactly. Holding the watch, and then people started to realize that, oh, their heart rate has gone down. But I remember I did my first 3K, like around UCD, my first 5K, and building that up really slowly. And I remember thinking, like, who are these lunatics that run a marathon? I don't even know if I knew the distance of a marathon, genuinely. Hands up, I don't think I did. I was like, these people who run 10Ks like 3 or 4 times a week. And then anyway, I continued to kind of build it up and up, and I got to about like 16, 17. Like every time I went to another further distance, I was like, okay, that's it, I'm capping it. And then I was like, oh, I'm quite close to a half marathon now, so I'll just go for half marathon. So I did my first half marathon in COVID. Now I didn't have the right shoes. I didn't have the right gear. I don't think I fueled. I don't think I stretched. So I made it to the end of my half marathon and I had partially tore my Achilles ligament. I also can't say that word. And even when people correct me, I still can't say it.
You and Sean are going to be best friends. With this intro and your pronunciation, this is brilliant. And
So that's it.
how was that? Like, did this happen early on in the race? Did you feel the niggle coming, or what happened?
No, so it actually wasn't even a race. I just went and did it myself. So I hadn't felt anything, but like, I mean, I hadn't been doing any proper stretching. As I say, I was wearing runners that had been in my wardrobe probably for, 3 or 4 years, had absolutely no support. And I felt like towards the end, like a bit of pain. And then when I was finishing up, it was actually really, really sore. And I'm really lucky that my uncle is a sports doctor. So I was able to kind of call him and talk to him about it. And it was only like it was partially injured. So it wasn't like completely ruptured. So it actually wasn't as bad as I had anticipated, despite the pain. Sean, I'm sure you, you know the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of went from there. I did my first marathon. I don't know if you guys heard at the time, Brezzy was doing that Marathon Mind marathon. Did you follow along with
Out
that?
in Out in
Oh God.
Mullingar or something, wasn't it? Yeah, I've heard of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that because then I got to half and I was like, at the time, it was kind of more, not that it was less about running, it was more about kind of having a goal during COVID. And I suppose his marathon really stuck to me because of like the campaign that he was running alongside it. It was more about like the mental side of running rather than just the physical side and numbers and PBs. And he had people who had really kind of tragic backstories come along with them. So I signed up for that one because that one really spoke to me. And that's when I did my first marathon. And I will stop there because I could go on, I could keep going on, but I'll let you guys interject.
Am I right in saying Brezzy brought out a podcast with this marathon as well about people with different journeys doing a marathon?
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah.
a lot like a podcast I know where two lads and a few friends started a podcast and no one had listened to it, and then Brezzy stole our idea. So Brezzy, if you're listening, I want €1 million or you better get on this podcast. Anyway, we've stayed in the game, Brezzy. We have stayed in the game. So when you took on that, everyone who takes on a marathon for one reason or another has a reason. What was your reason other than going distance more? You know, more than a half marathon. What drove you to a marathon?
Have you got sore, aching muscles? Then you need to ask for the Ultra Pure Laboratories Muscle Recovery range in your local pharmacy or health store. Trusted by athletes and tried and tested by ourselves, this great value and guarantee Irish range includes Epsom salt gels with arnica, perfect if you have no time or access to a bath.
The wintergreen heat rub cream, ideal for targeted heat support.
You just need to be careful where you put it, Sean, not for the faint-hearted. And a favourite of ours, the magnesium oil spray, brilliant for restless legs and muscle cramps.
Ice cold menthol gel with arnica, excellent for cooling and soothing tired feet and muscles.
And as we're talking to marathon runners and athletes, the relaxing essential oil muscle spray with 9 essential oils plus arnica, a gem of a product, and most importantly, vegan too.
For bumps and bruises, ask for Ultra Pure Arnica Cream. And last but not least, their magnesium-rich Epsom salts. We go through buckets of these. You just can't beat an Ultra Pure Epsom salts bath.
And it's the first wash you've had in years, Sean, bath or shower. So Ultra Pure, thanks so much for helping us out with that one. Ultra Pure Laboratories is an Irish-owned and award-winning family business based in County Mayo. Shop the Ultra Pure Muscle Recovery range in-store or online from pharmacies and health stores. Find out more at ultrapurelabs.ie. And by listening to this advert, you have helped this podcast and you are supporting Irish businesses. So let's get back to this week's episode of the Any Given Run Day podcast.
I suppose it was like something I never thought I'd be able to do. It's kind of like what the other people do. Do you know, like what, oh yeah, that athlete can do, or that person who you work with who is just an absolute machine, runs 20, 30K before work. And I guess like when I got to the half, I was like, could I do a full? Like, I'm not dying here. I got over the line. I'm enjoying the running. I was hating the running so much at the start. I don't know if you guys were the same. And a lot of my clients say to me, like, yeah, I just don't really like running. And I was like, I hated running. I absolutely hated running, probably because I was doing it all wrong, mainly at the start. So I guess it was that desire to like set a goal and achieve a goal that I never thought I'd be able to do. Like I never thought I'd be able to run a marathon, ever, 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 let alone do it in any sort of decent time and without passing out or getting sick at some stage. And again, the mental side. So I followed along with like Brezzy's journey. No, it wasn't necessarily Brezzy's journey, but he took those 4. Like I think people had to apply at the time, and he took like 4 people along. They got like an S&C coach. They got like a mindfulness coach. They got loads of different coaches, and to like bring them through this like 9-month journey. So I was like, this is kind of cool. I can listen to the podcast every week. I can kind of follow along. And as I say, the rest is history.
We're still, the podcast is still going. And now you're on it.
Here we are.
Sorry, Brezzy.
You call endurance running a mental sport. So at what point did that click with you? Was it getting towards that 30? Did you do 30, 32K and stuff like that before the marathon? Did you get those long runs in, or was it just difficult to get those in and the marathon you just went for?
No, I did get them in. So I guess and I don't know, you know, everyone, like you see all those like memes on Instagram, people doing runner's mats. I also had this thing on my head that like every time I'd increase my kilometers and I feel like it's unachievable, I'd be like, okay, but what if I had to do this? Like, what if my life depended on it? Could I do it? And like the answer was always yes. It was always like you're always psyching yourself out. And what I started to notice, and that's when I started to kind of pull on my psychology, is that like I would recognize those like negative thought processes like coming in, especially towards the end, and not that you'd necessarily push them away, you'd kind of address them and then be like, but it's only 2K. I've ran 10 or I've ran 15. It's 2, it's a fraction. And I also like to do things. I like to have kind of like small goals, even like in a big goal. So I would just be like, okay, get to the next kilometer. Don't worry about getting the 20 or the 25 done. Get to the next kilometer, get to the next milestone, get to the next gel. Well, it wasn't gels really at the start because I was not fueling. But I guess it was just breaking it down like that. And also being like to myself, okay, if you had to do this, if you and your family's life depended on it, that's such a weird way to think about it. But I was like, could I do it? And every time the answer would be yes, I'd be like, okay, well, then keep going. Like, you're not going to pass out. You're not going to die. So just see how you go. And I also knew the feeling that I've had after it. So I knew that like, I never thought I'd be someone who'd be running a 10K. I never then, when I ran 12, I was like, I ran more than 10K. Look at me, I'm an athlete. And then I'd run 15 and I'd be like, okay, I can get to, you know, that kind of way, like just break it up into really small pieces.
So first marathon.
First marathon. Do you want me to talk you through it?
Well, first marathon was 3 years ago. Soon after the Achilles injury, or how far did you take to recover before you got into that?
Good question. I remember it was cold for both, but it was in different seasons. So I think I did the Achilles maybe say like March-ish time, and then I did the first marathon on the 13th of November. It was a really eventful day actually for my family. So we went down to Mullingar. I did the marathon, nearly died, which I can also go through. And then my brother was playing a match back in Dublin. So we were like literally flying on 2 wheels back to Dublin that day. Got back, or sorry, before we got back, but when we got to the car and like, you know, I was kind of half fainting, half trying to eat. My mum's car wheels had gotten slashed. Her tires in her car had gotten slashed.
What?
I know.
Mullingar.
Yeah, my mum.
Eric, we've listeners from Mullingar. Be careful what you say next.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute.
I know. So we went into we were literally parked outside a pub. So a lovely man in the pub came out and helped. Thank God. My mum never has a spare tire in her boot. Ever, ever, ever. And this one time she actually did. So we went back, got back just right in time for the match. I was actually late for the match. I went back. I didn't even wash my hair. Like, put on clothes, packed my bag. It was actually my uncle's wedding that evening. He was just having like a small get together. But I went marathon in Mullingar, match, and then on to my uncle's wedding, which was on, I think it was like was it Malahide? So yeah, it was a long and eventful day.
Wow, that is a long and eventful day. Now, Sean, you better ask a question because I'm about to unleash them all. They slashed you. I bet. So,
Right, well,
does it work? Like, who's awake that early to go, do you know what we're going to do today? Let's go slash tires at the marathon. Come on, it's going to be hilarious.
I know, right? And then people coming up from Dublin and everything. I know. Anyway.
Before we get into how you get on in the marathon, usually when someone does a marathon, especially their first marathon, they at least get the rest of the day to make it about them, to celebrate it for a few drinks and stuff in the pub, whatever it is. Were you a bit taken back, like, in terms of like all of a sudden all the folks say, oh, well done, you did your marathon, but quick, we got to go to Dublin and then get the car ready to go to Dublin for your brother's match, and then, oh no, quick, don't even celebrate that. We got to get to this wedding afterwards. And it's all about different things instead of just like when I did my first marathon, I could barely walk to meet myself and Eric, and a few of us had a bit of food afterwards. I think it was TGI, stuff like that. Eventually we got in somewhere, but I could barely walk to the restaurant to get the food in. I was like, hang on, hold up. I need to like barely crawl to this place. But when we're sitting down, we're making about my accomplishments. And of course, Eric's dad didn't let us get away with that. And he just gave us awful abuse for 45 minutes. But
Well,
like, did you feel like it was just... Was it just like, here, give me a minute to breathe after this thing? How did you feel?
Yeah, I guess like I'd always known that was going to be the way that day was going to go. So like when I signed, well, maybe not when I initially signed up for it, but like on the lead up to it, well, I probably knew that it was my uncle's wedding. I'm sure I knew when I signed up that it was my uncle's wedding. And I knew that you know, if my brother was fit and healthy, that he'd be playing in that match. So I guess like I never went into it being like, this is a day about me. I was like, shit, we just need to get through this day. I was like, I just need to run. And I remember when I sat my marathon goal time, I was like, I kind of need to get this time because I need to go
Because
back
we are
to
on the
Dublin.
schedule.
Like genuinely, that's what our schedule was. I was like, I need to get this time because if I don't, or even if I like I'm half an hour behind, we might miss half the match. So
Yeah. And you want to run a bit quicker to allocate for the tire slashing time as well.
this is it. Had a bit of wiggle room.
Like a lot of people will get into your marathon. I suppose because I have a question about that and that finish line feeling, and then having so much other distractions. But that marathon itself, talk us through it, because you're very distracted going into it and pressure to just get it done. But did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Did you love it? Did you go through the roller coaster of emotions? And obviously, from your perspective, probably being able to recognize it a little bit more of what you're feeling.
Yeah, I did. Did I enjoy it? Okay, and it's kind of like a multifaceted question. Okay, so when I started it at the very start, I was really enjoying it. I actually, fun fact, never wear a watch when I'm doing a marathon. And I'd also never ran without earphones doing any run. But a lot of people had told me you'll enjoy it much more and you'll like get the like atmosphere much more if you're not listening to something. And again, like I was like, no, I need something blasting. I need Eminem blasting in my ear so I don't have to think about the pain that I'm in. But I put my AirPods in my pocket and I was like, look, I'll run and I'll see. And I had a really bad stitch. I remember like it was obviously, I think it was looking back, like just a mental thing. Got a really bad stitch. And I was like, I just keep running, just get through it, like it will pass. And I ended up being like, okay, I'm just gonna ask like these lads here. They were wearing Iron Man t-shirts. So I was like, this is not their first rodeo. So I think I just asked them something stupid, like just to distract myself, like, you know, how far along are we? Or like what pace are we going at? Or something like that. Because I didn't know what pace I was even going at. And then I ended up, I know, yeah. And then I ended up running most of the marathon with them. So that was really enjoyable because I'd never done that before. I'd never like ran, especially because it was during COVID. I'd never like ran in a group. I'd never had that camaraderie. We also kind of distracted each other. We talked about like normal stuff, obviously at snail's pace. So we probably ended up only saying about 10 sentences back and forward. So I'd say it was like enjoyable until about 32K, because I know the previous question you asked me that I actually don't even think I really answered was, did I get those 32s in? I did, but every time I did like a 30 or 32, I think I got up to 32, I was like, how am I going to run another 10? Like absolutely not. Like the way everyone feels before they do the first marathon. But I got to about 32 and I was like, okay, shit, this is quite hard. I still have 10K to go and I'm struggling. And it was also loops. I hate loops. I don't know if either of you have ever done a marathon of loops.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and you're like,
the loops.
I have seen that tree 1,000 times. Like, I need to be.
How many loops? How many loops is one of the
Well,
guys?
there's only three. I'm being so dramatic, but
Okay.
the third one seems like
Oh,
like you get to the third one, you're like, actually, I think that second one's probably the worst because you're like, I still have to come back here. So got to about 35, and at this point, I was like, okay, I knew kind of what time I was at, but I had to pick up the pace like a small bit. And I ended up being like beside the pacers, and the pacers kind of kept me going for those like last kind of 7 kilometers. But like, you know yourselves, 7 kilometers when you're in a lot of pain, it feels like Mount Everest.
Yeah.
So I would say the 7, but in particular, the last like 1 was grueling. I fell over the line. I must actually dig out the photos. I'm raging. I never bought the photos. The photos are the funniest thing ever. Like I'm literally like my mum was like when we were watching, she's like, I honestly thought you were going to pass out before you got to the finish line. Like my face, there's a photo of me like this, like when I get over the line because I'm about to get sick into my hands. But I think because I was also about to faint at the same time, because I could see the time, right? And it wasn't like a chipped event. So like you were literally just going off the time that like the big clock. And I was like, I feel like I was literally like 30 seconds away from the time that I told everyone that I was going to get, even though I didn't have a notion. So I kind of had to sprint like the last like 300, 400 meters. It wasn't pretty. It was but I got over the line and I got the goal marathon that I said I would get. Again, even though I had no notion of like I think I'd asked people like, what's a good marathon time? Like, this is what I was going off, and like kind of half mixed with the times that I'd done my longer distances in. So I don't really know if I had much time to like think then or dissect it. I was kind of like, okay, don't get sick, don't faint, eat, and let's get back to Dublin.
Looking to recover faster, train harder, and perform better?
And then what?
Perform Nutrition is one of Ireland's leading sports nutrition brands with a number of great tasting protein powders, a range of vitamins, as well as other supplements such as creatine. All products are made in the GMP facility in the west of Ireland, and they have a range of batch tested and informed sports certified products. Perform is trusted by a number of Olympians, High Rocks champions such as Sean Noble, he was in the podcast.
Yeah, right, he was.
Also CrossFit Games athletes such as Emma McQuaid and many more. Perform's goal is to offer the highest quality, best tasting nutrition products for competitive prices, and now you can get an extra 25% off all products with the code AGR on their website, performnutrition.com.
25%? I'm typing it in now. And don't forget, we are supporting Irish companies. You are supporting this podcast by listening to this advert. So support Irish, get behind your podcast and get behind your local businesses. And until then, let's get back to the podcast.
For such a journey on your first one, like me and Sean could write a book on our first marathon, and then the aftermath, and then the two of us nearly crying crossing the finish line. You're just sprint finish, don't puke, shut your mouth, get in the car. Any tips for your first marathon? 1, don't do it in Mullingar. 2, don't get sick and just get in the car.
And don't have other plans. You know what? Actually, after that, for my next marathons, I was like, I don't want to make any plans. I don't even want to make a dinner plan. I want to like finish it and see where the wind takes me. So, lesson learned.
Absolutely. And just that story just goes to show when people, it's very hard to tell this to someone that hasn't done a marathon before, but the marathon can be a 20-mile warm-up, and that last 6 mile, that last 10K is truly when the race begins, because you can be feeling great in that 32K. We've had people in the podcast talk about they just went too fast, and it's only when you get that 32K you get found out going too fast. You're like, uh-oh, now this race begins. And that last couple of kilometers could be like, I do talk about Dublin, that last 2 mile, and I do feel like the race is over because the crowds build and it's great and stuff like that. But when you're pushing hard towards PBs, that last 2 mile, that 3K can just feel like it drags forever, and it's a never-ending road. And that seems to be what happened with you with Mullingar. The last 7K, like you talked about, was just torture mentally. How are you getting through it? You said milestones, keep going.
Milestones. Yeah, I guess like I feel like there's a part that you can kind of explain and you can rationalize and you can have like a method in like how you get through things. And then I do think there is a part of it that you just dig deep and you grit on. I think for me, and it's something I do with all my clients and with myself with anything, any big goals. I think when you think about like 42 kilometers, or you think about any massive goal you have, whether it's like going back and doing medicine, or, running an ultra or running a marathon or whatever it is, when you think about it just as that, it becomes really, really scary. But if you break it down into increments and make it like small achievable goals, then you're not thinking too far ahead. You're just focusing on getting to the next small milestone. And I think that's really helpful, because you can really psych yourself out if you're like, I have another 10K to go and I'm in absolute bits. Like that's not good for your head. So I'd be like, okay, get to the next water station, get to the next, like, they have all the like, you get to 10K or 15K. It's like, just get to that next piece and just dig deep, like find somewhere in you that still has energy just to get to the next milestone, and you'll eventually finish on the finish line.
One of the things that I'm struggling with in the lead up to the marathon, the start of the intro, we talk about our progress and stuff like that leading towards it. And we'd always say, listen to your body, be careful of niggles and stuff, because they can lead into a lot worse things than that. And, the hardest thing is getting the starting line. Dublin every year, 4,000 people do not get that starting line for so many different reasons. A lot of it is injuries. I do think other things are there as well. But you talk about on Instagram, the line between pushing hard and pushing too hard. And I do struggle with telling people like, hey, I've always had Achilles injuries, but I can kind of push through them, but I wouldn't recommend it. So if I'm coaching and I know people, I'm talking to the gym floor and they're like, I'm struggling with this injury. I'm like, do you want the coach to tell you to rest up, or do you want me to tell you what the runner in me would tell you to do? Because they are two different answers. When you are coaching, because you push through injuries to get towards that start line, but also you don't want to push too hard. What do you define that line as?
It's a great question because I don't think that there's like a definitive answer, really, as you probably know yourself. I think that people have different thresholds of pain as well. So you have to be like mindful of that. Like, some people really get like caught up in like a really small niggle and like overthink it, overanalyze it. And it might just be like a little bit of a strain. I guess like something, and you probably both know from running a lot, is like self-awareness increases so much as a runner. Like you start to figure out your own, like where your own threshold is and like how far you can push. And like for Sean, for you, you have had Achilles injuries before, so you know that like, okay, that actually feels that feels too much. Like that line, which again is really hard to describe to someone unless because you really have to have a good understanding of your own body. I always like to say, like, I'm not a physio, I'm not a doctor, because ultimately I don't want to advise my clients like on either side of that. I don't want to be like, yeah, push through this injury, because it might actually be really detrimental and people can have really like long-term impacts from bad
100%.
injuries. And so I'd always recommend getting that like expert opinion. But I also think that you have to kind of to get back, like not even to the injuries, but I talk a lot about pushing, but not pushing too hard in relation to injuries, but also in relation to like fatigue, like for all of us average Joes out there who are running marathons, but also, have like full-time jobs, can't sleep in the middle of the day, don't have an S&C coach, don't have a masseuse. Like it's about pushing yourself and trying to fit in as much as you can, but also like if you're pushing too hard, that can lead to injuries. So I'm case in point of that. Like last year, got myself a metatarsal fracture 2 weeks before the marathon because I had just pushed myself so hard. And like I did know that I was crossing that line, but I was constantly like I was like dancing with the devil. I was like, no, but like I'm at my fittest now. I've never done intervals this fast. I've never done like, a 10K that fast, 5K. I really want to smash this marathon. So I literally was like fitting in like weddings, and like going abroad and still fitting in like my 4 or 5 sessions a week and like not getting enough sleep, etc., etc. So I think it's like finding the balance of like in that scenario, pushing yourself. But like I literally pushed myself into a stress fracture 2 weeks before the marathon and couldn't do it. So like what's better? Running a marathon maybe a couple of seconds slower than you would like, or not completing a marathon and having to deal with that 2 weeks before.
And it's a mistake. I think everyone who has done it without coaches, and even some with coaches, they still push too hard. And it's something that I suppose recovery, it took me and Sean probably a couple of years to figure out that recovery is part of the training plan. And it's a very, 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 very important part. Now, we don't necessarily listen to that all the time as well, but we're
very slow
slowly
learners.
begrudgingly learned that a week off would actually help. Yes, you might feel sluggish coming back into it, but after a day or two, you are performing better. Have you noticed that, or are you like us in terms of begrudging the rest periods?
Yeah, I definitely learned that not being able to complete Dublin last year because that was such a blow because I trained so hard for it. And I was like, Rachel, you're fucking Egypt. Like, you knew. I remember describing my fatigue to someone as like I go to work and I'd be like, it's tiring to type. Like, that's not normal. Like, there's a normal level of tired when you're training for a marathon. Of course, you're pushing yourself. And then there's like, it hurts to move my lips and move my fingers. So I learned from that? I definitely have. I think people who are innately driven and motivated struggle with that always. Like I remember again my uncle saying to me, I know I mentioned that he's a sports doctor. He was like athletes like elite or otherwise, especially if they're driven. He's like, you're gonna make this mistake again. And he's like, you are gonna make this mistake again, but try and like bottle this feeling of like what you're experiencing now and what you're not able to do now and help that inform how you move forward. So it's hard to know if I've learned the lesson because I didn't get to do the marathon. And then I started training kind of again in January but now I'm 8.5 months pregnant, so I can't exactly train as I used to train. So I'd love to say, yeah, like I'm enlightened now, but like who knows, next year I could be like, you could see on my Instagram, yeah, injured myself again 2 weeks before the marathon, pushing too hard.
So pushing too hard and training and also pregnant. We've had a lot of ladies on talking about training through the pregnancy, and it's something that's probably not talked about enough.
Yeah.
How do you balance training with pregnancy, and how do you feel? Obviously, every lady is different. In the first, fatigue is huge because your body is changing, the hormones are changing. How did you balance that as well as, I suppose, growing another human and training? How does that work? And we will never know what it feels like, but how do you balance that?
Again, it's a lesson in listening to your body, isn't it? It's like knowing the line. And I'd say I've crossed the line a few times. And then I've also listened other times. At the start, I was actually really sick at the start. So I didn't train for maybe like 2 weeks, which is like a kind of long time for me. And then, or at the very start, when I first found out, like you don't feel pregnant for most people, like you just feel the same way you did the week before. And I trained as normal. Like I ran like 20 kilometers at the weekend and that was all fine. Then I got sick. And then when I was coming back after it, I think I kind of started doing, like I definitely lessened my mileage. And then as time goes on, you get more and more tired. Like you're gaining so much weight in such a small amount of time. So it's actually you're carrying around extra timber. So everything is like much harder. And I had different periods throughout my pregnancy where I was like, no, fuck this. I'm not doing any more training. I'm just going to go to the gym and do like other types of trainings. But then I'd have a really good run and I'd run like 8 or 10K and I'd be like, oh, that was actually so enjoyable. And I feel great after it. And I also know that all the research says that it's a good thing to do and it's good for your birth. And it's good, like, there's a kind of like old folklore that it's like, women were told like do as little as possible. And that's all like redundant now. But again, I remember my doctor saying, she was like, you'll know when you're crossing that line of like, this is not enjoyable and I'm actually like really struggling and like insanely fatigued. And that happened to me like 3 or 4 times in a row, which was last weekend. I was like, do you know what? I was like, there's just something in me. And again, has to be like a really like tune into your own body because everyone's different. I have friends who stopped running at the start of pregnancy. I have friends who ran literally until a week before they gave birth. So I'm just keeping up the gym now, but the running, I was like, there's just something that's not sitting well with me here and I'm not enjoying it and it's like not feeling right. So you just kind of have to pull that plaster off and just go, I've done my best.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd make it to 33, 34 weeks. So.
And it is like everyone is different and it will affect everyone differently. And I suppose the benefit is like me and Sean have experienced pregnant women passing us out in a marathon, which is probably our
Nice
claim
work.
to fame. That's how bad our first marathon experience went. But it does depend on people's own thresholds, their own abilities, their foundation, I suppose, where they've come from. Like we're not saying you're pregnant, let's start training for a marathon. It's maintaining and being active and staying to what you know and the lessons you've learned since before COVID in the younger that the levels at which you can push. And that's probably the important message we need to say as well is just because you got pregnant is not a good time to start training for marathons or start taking up running, but definitely just maintaining some sort of active lifestyle on par with what you've done.
Absolutely. And that's actually what the doctor said to me. She was like, if you're fit enough to run a marathon now, you can run a marathon now, but don't increase weights. Like if you're in the gym, don't increase distance. Don't be trying to get personal best. So just like maintenance and then pulling back where you feel like you need to pull back as well.
You were talking about like it was old folklore that you can't do running and training like that, but it's mad. It's only like 50 years, which is not that long ago, that like there was men in Boston trying to stop women from actually running the marathon because if they ran a marathon, you won't be able to get pregnant. I'm hesitant to say this, I'm not too sure if it's definitely fact, but like your uterus would fall, not that it's fact, but they'd say your uterus would fall out if you were trying to run a marathon, stuff like that. Having said that, when you started this episode of the podcast, you talked about not being pushed to doing running clubs and stuff like that. And they have an initiative now for women to, if you do the half marathon in Dublin, they can get access to do the full marathon, that 48-hour window, the same as someone to go through it. And I had read before that up to 40% of women did double marathon. But then according to marathonguide.com, there was 16,000 or so finishers of the marathon this past year in 2023 in Dublin. 11,000 of them were men, and only 5,200 of them were female. Why such the huge gap in your opinion?
I know it's something I've thought about a lot, and it became much more stark to me when I actually ran the marathon myself, because I'd look around and I was like, there's all men, do you know, like there'd be like 7 men around me and then like maybe 1 woman. I'd say it's multifaceted, it's deep rooted. I don't think there's one logical answer or one
Like,
right answer.
can we go back to the likes of school? You mentioned that point earlier,
Yeah.
where it's like, we're just not interested. You know, people weren't interested in doing it. The competitive nature for the girls in school didn't really exist, you know, or it was uncool to go running, or,
Yeah.
you know, like, is it, are we talking like it's a grassroots level that maybe is where the problem is, or?
Yeah, like I'm 31, so maybe not so much anymore. But I think there was the girls in school who were sporty, but they were the girls who like did hockey, mainly who did hockey in my school. I know it obviously changes depending on what school you're in. And then like there was girls who were into different sports, say like outside of school. But unless you were someone who was like really, really good at sport, it's not that it wasn't encouraged. I don't think that's fair to say that it wasn't encouraged, but I think it's actually really subtle how much, as when we were growing up, you're not pushed into sports. It was like the boys do sports, and the girls might go to the gym. And that might sound mad to maybe younger people listening now, because I remember even when we all started going to the gym when we were maybe like 15, 16, it was a kind of like new agey kind of women starting to go to the gym, which again sounds crazy even coming out of my mouth because it's so normal now. But I think from a very young age, you're not really encouraged unless you're like a super athlete, or unless you're like noticeably insanely fast or insanely good at something. You're kind of just like, oh yeah. Whereas it seems like all boys at most, like at one stage or another, play sports, even if they're not that great. And it's just different for women. And it's the same with like when you go to college, like the lads have like football teams or rugby teams, and like the girls just don't. So I think there's that. And then I also think that like, because that's kind of ingrained, I do think as well, and I don't know if this is like okay to say, but I
All right,
think
won't edit it out. It's fine.
I think I think from when you're young, and I can only speak from my personal experience, but like being sporty was almost considered masculine. And like it was
Yeah,
considered
right.
masculine to be sporty. Like that's just the
The
way that we grew up.
butch girl playing sport. Yeah, yeah,
Your
yeah.
tomboy was the phrase used. Like it was, yeah.
Tomboy. So you couldn't be a girl who likes makeup and clothes and whatever else and also be sporty. So you're either one or the other. And it was like that nothing existed kind of in between. So I think it's that. And also, again, don't know. I know it is okay to say, but I think that, and again, I think it's probably more like a me generational thing. And if you guys have younger listeners, it might not be the same. But I think with women, maybe we're more realistic in ways, but I do think there's more self-doubt. Like I do think a lot of the time, boys grow up in an atmosphere that it's like, oh yeah, you just go and like throw your hat at it, like give it a go, give it a bash, you'll be grand. So I find a lot of my male clients aren't like, I don't know if I'm going to finish the marathon, or like I'm scared I'm not good enough. And whether that's because they're too proud to say it, or because like deeply they have like a deep belief that they're able to. Whereas most women, especially for their first marathon, are like, I'm not good enough to run a marathon, like little old me. And so I do think there's that. And I don't know if that's just like an innate feminine thing, or if it's something that's ingrained or like taught as we're growing up.
Men are definitely just not admitting it, because there's not a single person. Even though I'll be coming into my 6th one, I'll stand at that start line going, I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen here today. So it's definitely something we probably just don't announce. We just have this false confidence of, I'll be okay. And then you get there and you're like, oh no, this is not.
Not okay. I'm not okay.
Is the latest, this is going to differ. I just want to see the latest Olympics, we've seen a lot of our female athletes take center stage. Is that making a big difference now for the likes of you in terms of influencing a new generation of people who are starting to investigate running, investigate looking after themselves and their own confidence and their own mental health? Is that helping? Are you seeing a change from when we were growing up?
Definitely. And I definitely, like, you can see, I know the numbers still aren't 50-50. Maybe they'll never be 50-50, or maybe one day there'll be more women running the marathon than men. Who knows? But I think it is so important to see women in that spotlight and like see women succeed, because it's systemic, but it's also like from the top down, right? Like, we have grown up seeing men play sports. We all know tennis, like men tennis players, men like soccer players, men everything. And now we actually start to know female names. And like, didn't they do, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, wasn't it the relay, or maybe it was the 400-meter sprint? The women's was actually like the last event. Like, the last event is the big event, the one that everyone tunes into. So I think even for like little girls or like young women, even if they're not necessarily like sitting down watching the Olympics, they're hearing it in the background. They're seeing it on, like, even subconsciously, they're going into a shop and they're seeing women on like a front page of a newspaper. I do think those little things seep into our like consciousness, and then people go, okay, maybe I can do it. And again, those girls, and I'm not trying to like, everyone is entitled to be any type of woman they want to be, but a lot of the women we see aren't what when we were growing up we thought of as like athletic women. Like, they're women of all different shapes, sizes, interests. Like, it's not just the women who are really athletic. It's the women who are like doing their hair for the race and like wearing nice clothes, and and again, it doesn't have to be that, but it leaves space for every type of woman to get into sports if they're interested in doing so.
And it's very much, if you can see it, you can believe it. And it's the same for, like, it would have thought they could do an Ironman until they see me do it. Now everyone thinks they can do an Ironman. They are dead.
I was going to sign up after that one.
Yeah, Sean almost thought he could swim after he saw me swimming. It was that bad. And look, it is about seeing is believing. And the more we can see and the more we see people getting into it, the more that people can go, do you know what? My next door neighbor is after doing, and Rachel's, she teaches people how to run, and maybe I could actually do that. I'll give it a go. That give it a go feeling, because a lot, and even for me, and I know a lot of guys will suffer with it, I feel like I have to be fit enough to get involved with people. I have to be fit enough to try it instead of just putting on my shoes and taking the first step. And that, I suppose, brings me to another question for you from the psychological perspective. How good is running
For your head?
I have seen a lot of quotes saying anyone who runs a marathon is a sociopath. Anyone who runs a marathon is a I have never had the chance to have someone tell me if we are all nuts or not, or how good is it for our well-being in terms of our mental health and what it can do for us as people.
God, yeah. And I think the answer to that question is like, we could do a whole podcast on just that, right? Like, there's so many benefits. I think like you notice with people who are into like extreme sports. I don't know if I'd put marathon in extreme sports. I do definitely see there's like a lot of people who do like really like loads of Ironmans in a row or whatever. Maybe they're trying to like channel an energy that they maybe haven't addressed like emotionally, or it's a way of kind of expressing themselves that they haven't managed to do in the verbal sense. But I think like I don't see how there's any pitfalls or there's any negative associations with getting yourself involved in like a marathon or starting running. Like, you're getting outside, so you're getting your fresh air, you're getting the endorphins from running, you're getting your steps in, you're like meeting people along the way, so there's that social element to it as well. So I think like what I would say is it's like anything, and one of the phrases my dad always uses is everything in moderation, including moderation. And I know it's hard to talk things.
I've never heard the
I
additional.
like that.
That is
Oh
going
God, you're
in
in
the
my
book.
house, you hear it at least once a day. And I mean, it's hard to be moderate and run a marathon, right? They sound like they don't coexist, but I think they do. And I think it's like I think as long as you have a healthy relationship, again, blurred line between what a healthy relationship is, but I think if you can have a healthy relationship with something and it not interfere, have a negative impact on like things outside of running, I don't see how there's anything negative to do with running at all. That would be my personal opinion.
And it's amazing that you say you don't see a marathon as an extreme anymore. And if we go back 10, 15 years, there's a lot of people who were like, marathon is extreme, and it's becoming so commonplace now that so many people are doing it. again, seeing is believing. We're getting to witness people like you doing it, myself and Sean do it. Now everyone's like, marathon. We can do a marathon. That's easy.
We can do it.
Now the three of us have to actually do more crazy things to be validated in the world of Vince Stewart. Damn it, Sean. We're not crazy.
I don't know if you guys get this though, but it's so funny, isn't it? Like, as I said, I never thought I'd be able to run a marathon, and now I'm like, oh well, I do an ultra. Like, and I don't know what that is. You get to the point that you're like, okay, I want maybe to get a PB, and I don't know if it's like an innate human thing that we just want to be constantly achieving and getting to like the next step. And then some people run one marathon, they're like, never again. But yes, if the average Joes can do it, anyone can do it.
When you pass that marathon once or twice, it's like either you get faster or you go longer. It is one or the other, especially after your second marathon. One of those two things happen. We've had both on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
When you're running, and I find the first 7 kilometers is I'm kind of coming full circle to the start. My brain is saying, what are you doing? This isn't a pub. This isn't a show. Where are you going? After about 7 kilometers for me, and that's why I prefer doing longer races, I reach this kind of sea of tranquility, for a want of a better word, where I start to solve all of the world's problems. I can pick things off my brain, and the next 10 kilometers could go by and I wouldn't even notice, because I'd have thought of so many other different things. And kind of another reason why I like to run without earphones. If I'm feeling energetic, if I'm feeling crap, I'll wear them just because I won't be able to think of anything. What goes through your head? Because obviously in your career, you spend time analyzing people's thoughts and what they're doing. How do you deal with yourself, knowing what you know with the degrees that you have? Or do you just let the same kind of thoughts wander, solve all the same problems? Or is there any little tips and tricks people can do that can make an added benefit for going for a run, or things people can think about that can help them in their everyday lives with the run?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that everyone has a different experience of that, because I don't think I've ever been like, oh, 10K has gone by and I haven't noticed. I don't think I've ever experienced that. It's like that runner's high. I definitely get like towards the end, I'll be able to like pick up energy. I guess one of the big things I find, and this is maybe not so much on the actual run, I'll go back to the actual run in a minute, but I think as humans, we all have like a negativity bias, right? We all, and it's like an evolutionary thing. We seek out danger. We seek out like not being good enough because it's a protection mechanism. It was why we survived when we had to like chase off bears and hunt and stuff. And I guess it's like recognizing, like being able to recognize those negative thoughts and not follow them down a rabbit hole. So like to be able to be like really mindful with your running. I suppose it does apply both before and after and during. Like, so if you're on a run and you're having like, I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, like actually replacing that thought, being like, oh, I see you. I see you, head being negative. I see that devil on my shoulder. And this happens every single time I go on a run, and recognizing those patterns of like negative thoughts and replacing them with not these Pollyanna, like super positive, like I can do anything thoughts, but more realistic, measured thoughts. And I kind of pulled that from like some of the like CBT techniques. So you're going, okay, I see you, negative thought, but like, what's the evidence that I can't finish this? Let's not talk about like being super positive. Let's not talk about being like, we can do anything and real cringe, that kind of like American mindset. But what is the evidence that I can't finish this? Like I finished it before. Like I don't know if this isn't always true, but like looking at like previously, like when have I ever stopped? Like when have I ever actually stopped and not completed this? And if you have, maybe that was 1 out of 20 runs. So like the odds are with you. So let's like take the evidence and actually be really clinical about it. That's one thing I would say. And I think just catching yourself even is like really, really helpful. And then I also do, and I know I've talked about this and talked to this a couple of times, but I think it's like breaking the runs down into like small, like incremental, like not being like I have this marathon to run or I have this 30K to run, but breaking it into like different sections. And when I did the marathon in 2022 and I actually did that injured, like that, I really had to lean into that. I really had to like dig deep, find somewhere in me that hadn't been wounded or that wasn't in pain, and just be like, get to the next station, get to the next like milestone, get to the next like kilometer sign, and just not thinking like too far down the line. And as I said, it's the same with anything. If someone went back to do medicine, like the thought of like, oh my God, I have like 10 years ahead of me before I actually go in, that's going to stop you from making that first step, right? So you have to just think about like, okay, let me just do the application. Let me just give the application the best shot and go from there. So they're kind of like a couple of the things that I would do.
Yeah, and another thing you kind of mentioned was running without the watch,
Hmm.
because what you're saying is, what's the evidence that I can't? If you have a watch that says your heart rate is 180 and it's starting to show a lot of evidence that you're fucked, really, to be
Yeah.
honest. So is that a good reason why people should forget about Strava? Because again, it's a social media that we find ourselves addicted to. I've been on runs where I was like, I can't stop now because I told everyone on Strava I was going to do it. Is it a help or a hindrance? Is it a stick? Is it a carrot? Or what way do you think it's working? And why not run with watches?
I think it depends on your relationship with it. Like I think that, and I've definitely been on both sides of that. I remember when I started running first with heart rate, like, running for heart rate rather than like running at speed. I was like, oh God, everyone thinks I'm fast. And now they're going to look at me and be like, oh, is Rachel getting slow? And it's actually really hard to admit that. And I remember disconnecting my Strava. And then I remember being like, that's so embarrassing.
Yeah.
I disconnect my Strava because I'm too embarrassed to run at like what I perceive as a small pace or what I'm worried people are going to think is a slow pace. So again, I think it's your relationship with it. I think some people find it to be really motivating to like hold themselves accountable to a watch or to a Strava. But for me, I find that like that can psych me out. So I feel like I'm much better at racing against myself than than racing against other people. When I start to like compare myself to other people, it's like comparison is the thief of joy. Like there's always going to be more people who are better than me than who are not as good as me. So if I'm able to improve my own speeds and my own times and stay in my own lane, that's where I'm going to see like the maximum benefit. And I also like kind of I'm actually not big on Strava. I actually disconnected my Strava when I got pregnant because I was like, I don't want people to know I'm pregnant because I was running like ridiculously slow kilometers and ridiculously short. I was like,
And then you
people
have the
are
likes of
not.
me and Sean, they're like, we would never put them two together. Oh,
No.
an extra minute a kilometer. She's definitely pregnant.
And also nobody cares. That's another thing. And it's a piece of advice I give to people when they're like doing the marathon. Like again, it's amazing to have goals. It's amazing to be like, reaching for something, trying to improve yourself in whatever way that is, like whether it's running or whatever it is, or a new hobby. But nobody cares other than you. Do you know what I mean? Like no one's going like, did you see Eric didn't run his 10K as fast? Like, people don't do that. People are only thinking about themselves. So I think, and to get back to the actual question about the watch, for me, I just find it easier to like tag a pacer, right? Like, I'm not looking at my heart rate. I'd be the type that if I saw 180, I'd be like, oh yeah, gonna have a heart attack, so need to actually slow down. Whereas what I don't know won't hinder my performance. I can just keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. I remember me and my partner did hill sprints in Portugal, and we had like been like we I don't think we had drank the day before, but we were on like a holiday where we were having a few drinks and stuff. And my watch started buzzing because it went like above 200. And I was like, oh no, Sean. I was like, I don't feel good. I was like, I actually really no, I think I've taken this too far. Like honestly convinced myself I was having a heart attack. I obviously wasn't. So again, it's your relationship with it. And if you can have a healthy one with it, great. But recognizing when your ego is kind of getting in the way, which mine definitely does.
I've had moments where I've felt like I'm about to have a heart attack, and I'm like, oh, I am really like this is bad. And then and only then do I look at the watch and go, oh yeah, yeah, no, it is. So I use it kind of as a check of
Yeah.
how do I feel? Does that line up with what I'm doing? Does this feel like a 5 minute pace? Does that line up what I'm doing? And I think that's probably what people should be using devices for. Like I think of it, I don't know what you think of it. I think of me as an experiment. And as you said, it's all just about you and comparing about you. Yes, me and Sean might be competitive and slag and stuff, but Sean is doing his experiment and I'm doing mine. The experiment is totally different because Sean will eat different to what I will eat. Sean likes what I don't like. But at the end of the day, at some point in our careers of running, the experiment will come to an end. And that's why I think it took me a little bit to mature, but this year, even through the summer, I'm telling people I'm walking mostly because the heat and this and that and being realistic. And it is embarrassing. But then part of it is documenting what was it like to start training for a marathon in a desert environment with temperatures of up to 50 degrees. And those times and those like realities are part of your experiment. It's part of understanding when you're tired, when you're pregnant, if you're running a minute slower, all of these different things. I suppose is it took me many years to figure out that it doesn't really matter what everyone else is doing. Yes, I'd like to be as fast as them, but I'm on my own experiment and trialing things and picking up bits and pieces from other expert scientists like yourself coming onto our show and giving us the nuggets. And I think if people start looking at it like that, they can really start to just appreciate what they do is for them and for them only, and where they get in a week's time or a year's time. That's a sign of what happened during your last year and who you were and what you did. Does that make sense? Or is that a good way of thinking of it?
And I think as well, like as humans, we're really good at looking forward and not so good at looking back. So like what I love about training people, and it's so funny because like even though everyone's so individual, everyone's so the same in so many ways as well, we forget how far we've come. Like people would look at like me or you guys and be like, oh yeah, but they're great runners, or like, they're well used to this or whatever. Not seeing where we started, not seeing our first 3K, our first 5K, our first marathon, whatever it happens to be. And I think people really forget to stop and take stock of how far they've come. So when I'm training people, I always get them when they're having a bad day to like look back at their training peaks, and which is the app that I use when I'm coaching, to look back. And I'm like, and I remember like, so one of the girls that I trained for the Paris Marathon this year, I don't think she had ever ran more than like 5 or 10K. And when I first spoke to her in November, she was like, yeah, I mean, eventually one day I would like to do a marathon, but I just want to get up. I'm postpartum. I just want to get up to like a 5K or a 10K. And maybe one day, maybe like next year, Dublin Marathon. But her partner, her husband and like loads of her friends were doing the Paris Marathon. And I remember like her first 3K, she like found really hard. Like obviously she's postpartum. She hasn't, she's never done any long distance running. It's always going to be hard at the start. And anyway, eventually between the jigs and the reels, as I said, brevity is not my strong suit. I don't want to tell you all the details, but we decided, because she was, working up towards that like 21, 22K. And she was like, oh, will I do the marathon? Like, will I sign up for Paris? And I was like, yeah, like, why not? Like, sign up. The worst thing that's going to happen is that you're going to have to walk for a bit and you'll be slower over the line. But I remember through her journey, so that was like, say, November to like April. And I remember through her journey, she'd be like, oh God, I just did such a shit 25K. And I'd be like, okay, let's talk about the conversation we had 3 months ago when you said, maybe I'll aim to run a marathon in a year. And now you're talking about the shit 25K you ran. And like, let's look at the comments you left in Training Peaks when you did your first 5K and how far you found that, or how hard you found that. And now let's look where you are now. So I think like reflection is a really important part of the puzzle that we don't do a lot. And it's not that you need to stop and constantly be like, oh, haven't I amazing? And haven't I this? And haven't I that? But like, again, just really clinically, like, look what I found hard a month ago and look what I'm doing now. Or look what I found hard a year ago and look where I'm at now. And use that rather than, oh, well, look what, Rob, who's been running for 10 years and also has different genetics and also might be younger or whatever, like that's not helpful. That almost psychs you out. Whereas if you see how far you've come, you're like, oh yeah, well, if I can come that far in like 3 months, like how far can I go in another 3 months? So I think reflection on your own journey is a really important part of that piece as well.
Someone listening to that story, Rachel, might be like, I want to work with Rachel. Yeah. How can I do that?
So most people contact me through Instagram. I do like also word of mouth. I find word of mouth is really helpful as well, because again, it's those stories of people who like myself. And I don't know, again, if you guys had this experience, but like, I wouldn't have even known where to look for a marathon coach. I wasn't, as I say, like in a running circle. I wasn't in like a running club where like I had access. I was like, people who have coaches are like elite athletes, and then there's more at the, you know, I found that there was like a lot more like presence of male online coaches. So through my Instagram, and then also, yeah, like word of mouth, like people end up contacting me being like, oh, blah, 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 ran a marathon with you, would like to sign up. So yeah, usually just people send me a message and we have a quick chat on the phone, talk about goals and go from there.
Yeah, your Instagram, ton of great running advice, great running tips and stuff like that, and how you break down runs is fantastic. So we'll definitely have that in the show notes. Before we finish, just want to ask a quick question because you touched on it a little bit, and I saw you had a great reel earlier in the year on this. You talked about you have like a lot of background in terms of your family, your brother playing and stuff like that, and how your first marathon went. And then you put a lot of content out on social media about doing different runs and you're training towards your goals and all the rest. And obviously you've got your online coaching. Do you ever feel the pressure of all that when you're struggling and you're getting those niggles, you're trying to overcome them, you're trying to keep pushing? Is that sometimes that outside pressure that's obviously put on you by yourself because you're an online coach and all the rest? Does that ever push you over the line or too far, not that social media kind of thing?
Definitely. But what I've learned is the more authentic you are, and this again sounds like really cringe and American, but I genuinely mean it. I think the more authentic you are on Instagram, the more people relate to you. Like, I think that people respond much more to my vulnerability than they do to when I put up like a personal best. Like, I think people are like, oh yeah, whatever. See that, like, you know, see that in your feed all the time. Like, I don't really care. But when I say like, I've had a really bad day, I've had a really bad week, or even if I haven't posted in a couple of weeks, you start to kind of be hard on yourself. But I think when you, as I say, are vulnerable about that, people see you as like, oh, I can relate to that because that's how I feel. So it can be hard to lean into, but I think it's even like, you know, me saying about like disconnecting from Strava because I was like embarrassed that like people will be judging, oh, has she gotten slower? But again, I think that speaks to people. I don't think me being like, oh, I've ran a marathon in this time, or I can run a 5K in this time. I think that speaks less to people and more of like the human, like, I got injured, I fucked up, I wasn't able to complete that. People go, oh yeah, me too. And that's where they relate to. So I think if you can flip the lens on how you perceive that and how you deliver that to the world without being like, oh wow, me, poor me, I think it lands with people.
Rachel, it's been absolutely brilliant, and we can't thank you enough. We're aware we've stole an hour of your very precious time, and we've kept you in good form. 8.5 months pregnant. I think we have achieved something great here today with you as well. But thank you so much for giving us your time today. We will, as Sean said, have all your details in the show notes if anyone wants to reach out to you and get in touch and follow along for some, as we said, honest and genuine perspective of what it's like to go through the trials and tribulations of being our average runners that we are. But thanks again for giving us your time. It's been an absolutely wonderful episode.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much, guys. Really, really enjoyed it.
And that's it for this week's episode of the Any Given Day podcast. Myself, Rachel, and Eric. Take care.